Um, Good day, everyone. My name is Glen Hutson. Welcome to the session of Mac to the Future, linking macOS and iOS to the Sky API ecosystem. A little bit of introduction about myself. My name is Glen Hutson. I'm a principal solutions architect here at Blackbaud. Been at Blackbaud for about 17 years now. In my time here at Blackbaud, when I first started, it was before the cloud, before anything was on serviced by others, in which everything was hosted locally. Almost everything ran on Windows, and so there, definitely some interesting scenarios kept popping up with that. Part of that includes, walking when I was doing training and such for organizations, especially working with K-12. I'll be walking into different scenarios in which I'll be walking in and seeing that lab room or whatever full of those shiny white Macs, and sitting there going, wait a second, maybe there's been some miscommunication or crossed wires. Now the nice thing is that now that we are in the 21st century, now that we're in 2024, we got a lot more options that are available to us. So today we're going to be talking about with the introduction of Sky API. There are many more possibilities for integrating solutions into the Blackbaud ecosystem. We've got low-code options that bring customizations and automation into the reach of citizen developers. And most of this has been focused on integrating the software solutions. But let's focus on how we can integrate our devices into the system. Those similar options we'll be talking today may be available for Windows and Android systems. Today's session will focus on macOS and iOS and iPadOS. One thing to keep in mind is we'll be talking about some third-party systems and apps as part of this conversation. These aren't to be considered an official endorsement by Blackbaud, but definitely those that I've run into as I've been working with different areas. Some of you may already realize this. There are a couple different automation options that are already available in macOS. The first was Automator. That's the classic workflow system that was released in 2005. That has a wide range of automation options, not necessarily as low code, but definitely not needing a programmer. Could do a lot of different things as far as automating different things on the Mac and in the Apple ecosystem. These things can certainly be scheduled, but it's not available for iOS. It's a macOS only type scenario. Then we got shortcuts. Shortcuts were acquired as workflows by Apple in 2017, originally for iOS. Has also a wide range of automation options, a bit different. Some of the stuff between Automator and shortcuts overlap, but there's definitely some things that shortcuts alone can do. And then again, the macOS version was introduced about, I guess, 2 years ago to allow shortcuts to be available there. And the nice thing about this is that the same shortcuts can be run on iOS and macOS, depending on features used. There are definitely some differences between the two systems. For those of you that might already be working with shortcuts, you may find that those that you create on your Mac also automatically appear on your iPhone and vice versa. Scheduling options are also available for the shortcuts. And the nice thing about shortcuts, they work with Siri. Because of the fact that shortcuts are available on both, the portable devices and macOS, that's the key thing that we're going to be focusing on today. If you haven't had a chance to work with shortcuts before, if you go to the shortcuts app on your Mac or iOS device, there is an official Apple gallery. There's also unofficial third-party sites. Many of these actually existed before Apple actually acquired workflows and it became shortcuts. So there's a number of those out there. And of course, there are certainly ways you can actually go through and share these individually. Now, key thing to keep in mind, and of course, if you've ever shared those or actually imported a flow from a shortcut from a non-official place, there's always that warning that says go through and double check the shortcut just to make sure that there's nothing crazy going on and whatnot. So we got shortcuts. Shortcuts are something that's really cool. We have those available on macOS and iOS. How is that going to fit into the Blackbaud, into the Sky API ecosystem? So for those of you that already work with maybe some customizations to FE, RE, and the like, you may be already familiar with the likes of Sky add-ins. And among those Sky add-ins, this allows you for kicking off certain processes, either directly from a record that has the context information as far as that record, such as, I'm kicking this off from Robert Hernandez, or, for example, from the home pages of our various solutions, such as Financial Edge NXT and Razor's Edge NXT. You can actually just put, those links, those buttons, as far as the task boxes on those pages. Those are really more if you're just trying to kick off a process that may not necessarily be relevant to an individual constituent. Some examples may be, you might be seeing some examples out there already for kicking off the record report as far as the code tables and what have you. Again, those items that you may just want to kick off on demand that don't necessarily apply to a single constituent. So we've got those buttons on those sky add-ins. Now, what's really happening behind the scenes when you actually work on that button sky add-in, whether it be from a constituent record or from the home page, is basically doing an API call that is actually kicking off another process behind the scenes. And we actually have a number of Power Automate templates. I will be talking about Power Automate a little bit through the discussion today. And of course, everything I talk about can be done by direct API calls and what have you. Again, I'm not a pro coder. I'm a low coder. So certainly we rely on Power Automate quite a bit. But there's actually definitely behind the scenes already, and we already have these templates available about triggering a flow from a Sky add-in that basically listens for, that button making a call to that flow in order to kind of trigger what's happening behind the scenes there. So that's we already have that in place. Now, the nice thing about this is that if you go back and you start taking a look at shortcuts within macOS and iOS, there is an action there that's called get contents of a URL. This is basically a way that you can invoke an API call directly from a shortcut, again, on either system. And if you're familiar with about the way you can call shortcuts and call APIs and stuff like that, oftentimes those may include passing along information, maybe the form of a JSON or what have you. You actually have the ability to actually do this directly from a shortcut within, or from an action directly within a shortcut. So the nice thing here is on a very basic level, if you've got any of those, non-constituent specific processes, those on-demand process, maybe getting a report generated or what have you, and I'll talk about some other examples in a few moments, you'll certainly be able to go through and kick those off without actually having to log into Razor's Edge or Financial Edge or what have you. I know I keep talking about Razor's Edge, but I've certainly worked with a number of other solutions. Now, I'll talk about in a few moments that says you may be thinking to yourself, hey, if somebody's not having to log in, what about security? We'll certainly start talking about some security conversations or security items in just a few moments. So at least, again, on a very basic level, if I want to kick that thing off, I want to call a URL, I want to pass it some parameters, color, number of items. We'll talk about some other examples in a few moments. That can actually, we've already got a way that we can kick that off directly from shortcuts within, within our Apple devices. Now, the nice thing about this as well is that it's not just kicking off a shortcut. Certainly, if you've worked with these before, there's actually a number of interactivity. So if you've worked with shortcuts before, you have the ability to actually ask for input. It's not necessarily just clicking a button and having stuff happen behind the scenes. You can actually pull stuff from clipboards and some other areas. We'll talk about some solutions like that in a few moments. But if you actually want to go ahead and take some of that information and pass it, what is your name? What is your quest? Bonus points if you catch those references. You can actually ask that as part of the invoking of the shortcut and also pass that along into the API call. And then, of course, we've got the results of that flow can actually be seen in an action that is called, show contents of URL in Quick Look, or we actually have a way of doing it in a version of Safari. So the nice thing is that you do certainly have the ability to not only kind of, kick off a process behind the scenes, but we can actually, the response from that URL, you can also view directly with on your device. So again, you definitely have some of that back and forth. So we've got, one level of interaction that we now have available on our Apple devices. Let's talk about another level of interaction that we call widgets. That's widgets. Now, widgets has actually been in macOS for quite a while. It was part. I've even forgot what the old name of it was, and it disappeared for a while, and then it came back. The current version does allow for adding things to the notification center and the desktop. And then it was finally introduced to iOS 10 on the home screen and then lock screen starting in iOS 14. And the nice thing is that in addition to the other types of widgets out there, you do have the ability to actually have shortcuts as widgets. This is definitely something I know a lot of us were waiting for widgets when some other solutions were having widgets for quite a while. But this definitely actually opens up a number of different possibilities here as far as basically getting information directly on your Apple device without necessarily have to log into your Blackbaud solution. Now, the key thing about widgets is that in most cases, widgets are an extension of a full app. So a widget rarely exists by itself. It is, for example, I'll fly on Delta, so I got a Delta widget on my desktop. The clock has clock widgets. Different applications have a widget, and the idea there, um, uh, so the idea there is that you're basically getting like little pieces of information from the overall big app. Now, if you want to create widgets, you can be a pro coder and work with WidgetKit and create an app and create that widget extension. But there are actually third-party apps out there that are available to create these custom widgets. There are a number of those out there. One of those I've never figured out how to pronounce, so there's a name on it right there. Um, and I chose that one because it includes reading and parsing of JSON feeds, of getting that information that's part of an API response and formatting that. So this allows for displaying key stats directly on your Apple devices. And the nice thing is that once you create a widget in the system, you can actually export it and share it somewhere else. And honestly speaking, what I've realized, even though that this app is available for both iOS and macOS, is one of those that got ported once Mac switched over to Apple Silicon. Again, this is only available for those that are on Apple Silicon, at least this app is. I found that it's actually easier to create my custom widget on my phone and then export it and then add it to my desktop because there's some kinks there that hopefully eventually be worked out. But the nice thing is here is that without having to create a full-blown app that does other stuff, you actually do have the ability to go through and create these custom widgets. So let's see some examples of these in action. I'll go ahead and minimize my screen here. Oh, I got some more stuff open here. So you should see my screen out here. I've got a number of widgets available. Now, I've got my clock widget and what have you, but I've also got other key widgets that are showing up. Let's start here at the bottom. This is where that custom widget app is coming from. Now, on a regular basis, I actually have a Power Automate flow that's going on behind the scenes that is actually doing a periodic check as far as what's going on, as far as my examples here, total gift amounts this year, total amount raised, how many new constituents I have this year, how many new donors do I have this year, and so forth. And the nice thing is that this is being updated. In my scenario, I'm updating the gifts every 12 hours and the constituents every day. So you see some differences as far as the time goes there. But the nice thing is if I'm working, and I'll show it a screenshot from my portable device, my mobile device, in a few moments, I can be working during my day, and it's right here. I don't even have to leave and go to Razor Edge or Financial Edge or the other systems that have Sky API. I can have this information showing up right here, so I don't have to stop what I'm doing. So I can keep an eye on the different things, and I'll show you another example in a few moments of other ways that you can keep your eye on things. Now, let's talk about some things, some processes and some things like that I would like to go through and actually kick off. One of which I've got a number of different widgets up here. The first thing is going to be my get donations. So I've got a process behind the scenes. I've got a Power Automate flow that this is connected to that goes through and says, hey, if I want to get donations, how many donations have come in the last week or whatnot, I want to go through and kick that off. So I can actually go through and say, hey, let me go ahead and kick that off. It's actually kicking that off behind the scenes. Now, this flow by default is actually, or this process is actually only looking back a couple of days by default. So in this case here, there's a information piece on my screen that says, nope, there's no gift starting my default June 1st, 2024, and it's not going to necessarily go further from that. Now, this is where the nice thing is about the interactivity comes into play, is that when I go through and I've got another version that this is my shortcut behind the scenes. That's another version of getting donations, but this is going to be an ask. So this is actually asking me. So the nice thing is about this is that you'll actually be able to go through and then ask how far back you want to see. So I do see a question that pops up that says, how are you using Power BI on a Mac? I was told I need a PC. So there's definitely a difference between Power Automate and Power BI. Power BI, definitely, to get the most use out of it, you still need to be on a PC. You might have seen briefly, I've got Parallels on my Mac, so I can access that. There are some pieces of Power BI that you don't that you can do directly from the web. But you also do have the ability, but Power Automate, which is the automation tool, um, there is a desktop version of Power Automate, just like on the Apple side. On the Windows side, I actually bought that from a third-party company. But the Power Automate that we use most of the time, and I'll actually show an example of that in a few moments, is actually completely web-based. So it can be Mac, PC, Linux, whatever. So the Power Automate I'm referring to right now, which is a component of the Power Platform, but separate from Power BI, it's all web-based and you can work on it however you want to. And to answer your question, Yvette, I might have had a little bit too much coffee this morning, so apologies if I've kind of gone off to the races too quick. Certainly, we'll have some time, some questions. So I'll probably get through the presentation a bit quicker than I was anticipating. But yes, certainly this presentation will be available. I think the videos will be available the next day. And if you're already subscribed to the Power Automate or the Sky Developer communities, I'll be posting these examples as ready to import and ready to use. And then by the end of the week, so you can see some examples of this and go off to the races without having to create it from scratch. But again, certainly I'll be doing some peeking behind the scenes. So the nice thing is that in regards to the shortcut, I keep trying to call it a flow. This shortcut, I'm going to actually say, hey, go back behind the scenes. I want to go back, how many days back do I want to ask as far as getting a list of my donations? So I'm going to be able to ask this here. I'm going to click done. It's going to think briefly behind the scenes. It's actually querying the API. And then it's telling me here, oh, let me go back a little bit further. Gotta love live TV. Let's go back 5 days. My example environment. Oh, here we go. So there are 19 gifts available since 5 days back, May 30th, 2024. And it's telling me that the gift has kicked off. So more gifts mean more processing time. So I've got the notification, the immediate feedback from the flow, from the Power Automate behind the scenes. It's actually chugging along, putting together that API-based report for me. But it could take any, as long as possible in order for it to run. And in my example here, I'm actually delivering it via email. So I'll show you an example of an email I got that already ran. So here's an example that this is actually being done. This is a kicked off report that I've created with, in this case, Power Automate behind the scenes, but it was kicked off by the shortcut here that is listing all the different donations I received since my beginning date. And if you haven't had a chance to work with these before, these email reports or whatever that we can spit out of Power Automate, you can actually go through and as part of these actually create links. So if I want to go through and directly open up Victor's record, or actually go and directly look up the individual gift record here, you'll be able to do so. So again, we've got a number of examples of those in our community that certainly you can take advantage of if you hadn't had a really chance to dive into these other automation solutions before. So the key thing is the nice thing is that, again, I gave a couple of just very basic examples. Any other types of things or other reports that you would want to have on demand that people just, hey, I just want to get it when I want it. don't necessarily even want to log into Razor's Edge or Financial Edge or Education Management or whatever to get. I just want to get the report delivered to me when I want it. You can certainly do that now. And recall, all of these different things that I've created, these both the widgets and the shortcuts are all going to be available on my iPhone as well. So if I want to go ahead and get that automated report, that on-demand report, because you can also schedule those, I can be on my phone, schedule it, and know, go in and hit the on-demand button. So when I at least get back to my desktop, or when I'm done running my errands, I'll have that report available in my inbox. Now, that's one type of thing you can do, one type of interaction. I'm, sending it to the email because it may be a long list or whatever. What about, different things? What about, how can I get some of this information actually displayed directly on my device, my desktop or my iPhone? As I mentioned before, certainly there are ways that as part of shortcuts within macOS and iOS, you can actually get the results of a process or what have you. And this is the example of my display actions. In this example here, I've got a report that is set up that actually says what actions do I have outstanding. And I can actually, and I'm assuming that hopefully I don't have that many actions outstanding. Otherwise, you may have to send that to an email so people don't have to wait forever for that. But if I actually want to go through and see what actions I have that outstanding, again, of course, with Razor's Edge and XT, you have the ability to save those as calendar entries within your calendars, Google Calendar or what have you, Apple iCalendar or whatnot. But certainly, this is another way that people can go through and get and be able to see what their actions are, what actions are outstanding. And of course, just like my example about my email that came out, I can create links that link directly. In those cases, though, when I click on these links, I'll have to log into Razor's Edge or Financial Edge or Education Management if I've not done so already. But I can certainly, these freestanding, these immediate reports that simply just show on my screen immediately, you can actually create these links that says, hey, I've got an outstanding action to the Hernandez Family Foundation, or if I want to click on the link on the action specifically, I can certainly do that as well. So again, you don't necessarily have to wait for an email response, especially for those things that should take a little bit shorter time in order to in order to generate. Ooh. One of the other items that I discovered like the day before, let's see if I've got my example pulled up here, and I thought I did. Oh, I'll need to log back in. I timed out. For those of you that have Razor's Edge and XT, you may be aware that if you're using our included donation forms, either our standard donation form or a new optimized donation form, we've got a number of things that's called website components. And the purpose of these components is to be able to actually embed these on your website, such as a thermometer or different key metrics or what have you, so that people that are visiting your website can get that information as far as how close are you to certain goals. Now, even though these are meant to be embeddable on your website, there's actually ways you can actually get direct access to these. The benefit here is that when I go back over to my uh, uh, widgets here, is that I've actually got the one that I've created for my capital campaign actually kicked off from my capital campaign shortcut. So what the shortcut is actually doing is that, hey, I could create a Power Automate flow and all this stuff behind the scenes that I've done for those additional widgets. But if I actually got this thermometer created, in fact, this thermometer doesn't even actually have to exist or live on your main website, and you can have as many of these different thermometers as you want. If you simply want to give people the ability to quickly see where they are, this is actually a shorter way. And I created these different widgets way before we had these different website components available for Razor's Edge. But you certainly now had the ability to say, hey, maybe even skip this process, this long process I had for these other ones, simply go through and allow people, create these different shortcuts so that people just want to get a quick glance about, hey, how are we doing for the capital campaign or for the different campaigns or funds or whatever. You can actually do that directly right here. So again, the nice thing is that this gives people the ability to actually get that information without necessarily needing to have to log into the system. One final thing that I'd like to point out is that as part of shortcuts, you actually have the ability to add shortcuts to the share sheets as well as to the different related services area within the system. So for example, if you go to, I'm in Chrome here and I've got the services area or whatnot. Well, the nice thing is that you can actually use this to take things to the next level as well. So imagine you've got this shortcut that is available, that you've got it installed in your shortcuts and you've imported it from somebody else's created. I am actually going through and taking a look, and maybe I see a news article about a constituent, or I want to see something that I want to save and make sure that other people are, have available. I'm going to show a very basic example in a few moments. But the nice thing about this is I can actually go through and highlight this URL. I have got a services set up using shortcuts within macOS. I'll call it submit findings. It's going to ask you, what is this about? So maybe I was looking at an article about the good old Robert Hernandez. And then it's going to ask me if I've got any notes about this. Why am I saving this? Because I'm marking it because he's a board member. And the nice thing about this, the thing is that you don't necessarily have to send this to Razor's Edge or what have you. The nice thing about Power Automate that's kind of working, in conjunction behind the scenes, is that it works with the Google Suite as well. So the nice thing is that within a few moments, here it is, and it automatically popped up. I've got a Google Sheet here, just a very basic example, that has sent over that information. It's sent over the link. I was viewing something, the link, the subject, and the notes, so that if you got somebody that's part of your research team or your donor management team or whatever, that'd be good to know to actually go through and start reviewing this information as you submit it. Then they can actually have a centralized place to do this. Now, of course, I'm doing this here using a Google Sheet because I know proportionally speaking, if a lot of organizations are on Macs, then they're probably using Google as well. So I wanted to point this out, that certainly you can actually send stuff over to Google. You can certainly send it also over to the likes of, SharePoint or, various different things that are available there. So again, another way that you can actually, kick off processes directly from somebody's device without actually having to log into the system. Go back and talk about a few additional things. Again, here's a screenshot of basically the exact same things from my iPhone. So I got my get donations, my get donations ask, my display actions, those the constituents this year and what have you. Question that I had that came through is that, can you do a pick list instead of free text? Absolutely. There's a way you can do I think it's called in shortcuts, I think it's literally called menu. So if you want to just go through as far as those standardizations, you can certainly do that. And it would be more on the shortcut side. It'll be just a standard spreadsheet probably on the Google Sheet side, but you'll have it more of your shortcut like that. So again, a lot of these things that you have available right there. Now, a couple security considerations. One thing to keep in mind is these processes allow for someone to, my grammar's bad. These processes allow for someone to kick off processes or these options on to kick off things on view information without having to log directly into the system. That's a key thing to keep in mind. So you got to be very careful about what you're going to have available directly on that device. And I can show an example about this. I think we've got some time available. Is that for on-demand, these emailed reports? When I say these reports, we'll be talking about the new API, the new report API endpoints. I think there was a teaser earlier today, and it's going to be one of the sessions later. Anything that you have emailed, you can have a check in your process, whether it be a Power Automate powered process, or if you're using Pro Code Direct API, you can do a check and balance and say, okay, I'm only going to send email out to these email addresses. And you can actually have that email address as part of each version of the shortcut. So you can make sure that when something is going to be emailed out, it's only going to be emailed out to the right people. If you're actually displaying information on the screen, there are definitely some things that you may want to consider. The nice thing is that you can actually send over as part of that submission back up to the workflow. Some of the things that you can automatically send are things such as the device details, the device they're on, serial number, different key pieces of information. Maybe use that as a type of a type of double check. Maybe even create basically an ad hoc username lookup that's stored in a SharePoint, Google Sheet, Dataverse that's also sent as part of any post action. Almost similar in concept to an API key. So again, different ways that, especially if you're displaying it, whenever they click on the button, they'll be able to automatically display it. You want to make sure that there's some sort of additional check behind the scenes to make sure that the right people are viewing it, especially if you've got some personally identifiable information. Now, key thing to keep in mind is that both in the email-based reports and the immediately based reports, so the immediate pop-up of my actions, those different links that go directly, in my case, to Razor's Edge, they're still going to have to log into Razor's Edge to get that information. So it's not going to give them a quick pass directly over to Razor's Edge without having to log in. If they click on those different links, they'll certainly have that gatekeeper there as well. And I mentioned that, and again, these are really cool concepts and ideas, but definitely need some very deep thought, and especially for these immediately available information. Just that keeping in mind is that once you pull information out of a Blackbaud system, the security is on you as far as how that data is being managed. I can show some examples in a few moments of my different shortcuts and what have you. But somebody may, the question I got asked when I was kind of talking about this to others is that what was my inspiration for this project? This is how big of a geek I am. These widgets I actually originally created years ago when iOS first started supporting widgets. But I went into this really big tangent as far as, long story, comparing how hot or cold I got my garage as compared to the reported temperature. So this started off as by using my scheduled shortcuts to go and ask my HomePod Mini that's in the garage what the temperature is, pull in the reported temperature from the weather app, send up to Power Automate, push that over to the Dataverse, push that over to the Power BI service, and as well as pushing that, then I can actually look at that on my iPhone. Now, again, this specific scenario will probably never apply to anybody else on the planet other than me. But the only reason why I bring this up as far as kind of thinking about how can we kind of link, our, something what may seem as simple as our shortcuts with an iPhone and our Macs over into the rest of more of a fully automated system. With that being said, just want to kind of point up, pull up a few key things as far as different. Let me. As far as my different areas, so let me actually go back up. Let me stop. Well, where's the other one? Give me just a second. Oh. So on my Razor's Edge NXT area, just kind of show you an example of what these shortcuts look like. These shortcuts, especially just asking for basic information, is very straightforward. So it's basically, I've created a flow, and I'll talk about that in a few moments. Can show those as well. And all I'm doing is that when I click that button, I do the get contents of a certain flow that was created behind the scenes. And I'm passing along, in this case here, my email address, because I'm doing a check within that Power Automate flow what the email address is. So I'm making sure that people don't send it to something else. And in regards to my ask here, same thing, but just an extra step as far as how many days back. Then I'm actually seeing the results of the flow as far as that notification. And then likewise in respect to actually displaying my actions, I'm simply kicking off a flow here. showing my capital campaign. I'm just showing a web view. There's a show web view uh, uh, step or action that's available within shortcuts. And then, in my submit findings, again, these shortcuts this is like usually my, really my most complicated one that I'm just setting up to make sure that's available for my share sheet and my quick actions, asking these questions and these prompts on what it's about. One of the things I think it's, choose from menu, choose from list are a couple things. And there's a couple different ways that you can ask that for pre-selected items. So again, actually setting up these shortcuts behind the scenes are pretty straightforward. And again, once you create those for one, then you can export that and import that into other people's systems. And then behind the scenes, again, I know this is not necessarily a Power Automate or a Power Platform specific discussion. Even for those of you that might be interested in working with the Power Platform or Power Automate, even my flows behind the scenes, again, they're going to look very similar. The shortcuts and flows are going to look very similar as far as working that out. Some of them, end up being more steps than others, but most of these are going to be pretty straightforward for you. So again, won't spend. I can certainly we have some additional times for questions if you've got any, but definitely won't spend too much time on these workflows. But as far as what I kind of put together as far as what's available now, that how we can utilize shortcuts for the for the piece for Mac OS and for iOS, definitely gives us some additional options that are now available, and maybe with some food of thought to kind of help bring not only activities but information directly to people's desktops and devices without necessarily even having to log into the systems. Pause there to see if there's any questions. I think most of the questions that may have come through. Oh, so what are some of your biggest hurdles in converting a Power Automate flow to a widget? So what I have done to date is mostly used shortcuts to activate the Power Automate flow. I've not necessarily dived in yet to saying, hey, I'm going to completely recreate that Power Automate flow within shortcuts. The reason why is that shortcuts, there's no connectors for shortcuts to be able to connect to the likes of Razor's Edge or what have you. Right now, shortcuts don't support OAuth 2, which is this is getting really geeky. The authentication settings behind the scenes for the Blackbaud solutions. So in regards to in my experience, the handoff behind between shortcuts and Power Automate is more the shortcuts is that front end facing that initiation and what have you, and it's still mostly Power Automate behind the scenes that is doing that. And I just mentioned that you mentioned as far as widgets, so I was talking about shortcut specifically, but as far as widget goes, the biggest gotcha is just making sure that as far as my widget goes here, the specific widgets that are just more showing information, is just making sure you're formatting the JSON the right way and being very specific about that. So again, I read widgets originally as shortcuts, and I over answered that. But as far as these other just kind of display widgets, you just got to know JSON very well in order to have your Power Automate flow spitting out the right JSON so that these custom widgets can pull that up. Any other questions? And again, I recognize that. Thanks, James. Again, I recognize that these are very basic examples. These examples might not necessarily apply to you all, however, to everybody. But hopefully, just get some food for thought. Wow, I need more coffee. But certainly, would be interesting to see how others may take some information and run with it. So again, if there's any other questions, certainly I know we got about 5 minutes left, for just under 4 minutes left. I believe that the way that this is scheduled is there is a meeting directly after this. There's another session directly after this, so you will not hurt my feelings if you want to stretch your legs or whatever before the next session. But certainly I can hop around for just a few more minutes. See if there's any other questions that you may have. Oh yes, Jason. Thanks for the reminder. We do have a survey at the end of the session, so if you've not had a chance to be at some of these other sessions, we'd have a survey, just kind of getting some feedback on what you thought of the session, and it helps us kind of help planning future Blackbaud Developers Conference. For those the mini scenarios, the highest rated, you may have seen the highest rated sessions get a golden ticket to BBCon, so they can actually present their findings as well as BBCon. I am excited to say I got my golden ticket already, so I would still appreciate the high marks on the survey, but certainly for those others that are presenting, especially for your fellow nonprofits and whatnot, making sure that you vote for those surveys will help go a long way as well. Thanks, Sarah. Hope you take some ideas from that and kind of run with it. Thanks for attending, James. Appreciate it. Go ahead and stop sharing. Okay, there's no other questions. I'm going to go ahead and leave the stage. We've got speaking of which, I don't know if any of you are going to be involved in that. We do have a Power Automate session workshop starting in a little bit, so I'm going to go get ready for that. But certainly, we'll be interested. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out. So everybody have a great rest of the day and rest of Developers Conference.